We now come to the third component of a research proposal, the statement of the problem section. This is the central section in the whole proposal. It is the point of reference. It is the point from which all the decisions of the researcher will emerge. It is said, in fact, that a problem well stated is half solved. And this shows the importance of writing a good statement of the problem and its effect on the whole research process. Let's learn how to write a good statement of the problem. We begin firstly by clarifying what is meant by a research problem. We have clarified in a previous video that the rationale section should describe an ideal situation, a situation of stability. Now, when we come to the statement of the problem, we are going to show how this stable situation is disturbed. The statement of the problem, in fact, is highlighting an issue or a state of affairs in a particular setting where the ideal situation is not achieved. We understand from this that a research problem is related to reality. It is related to the real world. It has a setting. Therefore, it is important to tell where and when the problem arises. And in some studies, if it is applicable, we should tell also who is affected by it. We mean here the population. If your research has a population, this is the right place to speak about your population for the first time. If your research is about a corpus, in the case of textual analysis, this is the right place where you mention the corpus. In this section, the researcher will present the motivation or the rationale behind undertaking the research project or researching the selected issue. And he should also show why it is needed. All this is based on a gap, a research gap. It is also called a research niche. It is necessary then to find a research gap. Lack of previous research on the issue should be highlighted in the statement of the problem section. And if previous works have already dealt with it, it is necessary to demonstrate how the new project will draw on and enrich the available knowledge. Here we can say more about research gaps. In fact, there are types of gaps in the previous literature. A gap can be a knowledge gap. This means lack of information. It can be a theoretical gap. In other words, weak or missing theoretical frameworks. It can be also a methodological gap. Here we mean limitations in existing research methods, the previous studies, of course. Gaps can be empirical, that is to say, insufficient empirical evidence, and they can also be practical, that is to say, a disconnection between theory and practice. In other cases, a gap can concern even the population, and we mean here the understudied groups. And finally, a gap can be related to disagreement, in other words, conflicting research findings. So identifying these gaps helps researchers find areas where new studies can make valuable contributions to a topic or a field. When you discuss your gap in the statement of the problem section, you should include substantiating references. You have to refer to the sources where you have noticed the gap from the other related literature. And this will serve as evidence that the study is really needed and explain why the study is worth carrying out. So as an argument, when you supply the references, your argument will be stronger. Then the researcher will clarify the way proposed to settle the issue and move the real situation to the ideal condition. We mean here the goals or the aim of the study. In more technical terms, we say the objectives of the study. So the objectives should be clearly formulated. They have to be clear. That is, what does the researcher plan to do exactly? To explore, to describe, to compare, to investigate. So this should be very clear. Here, there should be one central aim, one general aim, and we may have separate objectives. Usually, the specific objectives are expressed in an infinitive form with an action verb: to explore, to investigate, to examine, to see the effectiveness, etc. The objectives of research lie at the heart of conducting research and the execution or the implementation of research in reality. If you have 2 objectives or 3 objectives, these are the only things that you are going to do in your study. Anything that doesn't appear in the objectives section is considered irrelevant, so they guide the whole operation. Sometimes novice researchers fall in the mistake of formulating objectives which are related to their literature review. For example, the aim of this research is to define the concept of motivation. This cannot be considered an objective. This is part of the literature review. Objectives should be very clear right from the beginning. If a researcher intends, for instance, to examine attitudes and challenges of a population towards a phenomenon, so the general statement of the goal of the study should focus on the attitudes and the challenges. Then the specific objectives have to be limited to the first. The first objective will be related to the attitudes. The second one will be related to the challenges. And this will guide the researcher in the selection of the methodology and later in the execution of the study in reality. Next, the researcher should stress the significance of the new project, the significance of the study, and its results for a given field. Sometimes the significance of research is presented in a separate section. Talking about the significance of the study is talking about the stakeholders, those who are going to benefit from the study. A study may benefit students. Sometimes the stakeholders are students, or instructors, or administrators, or researchers in a field. It can be society or a community as well. Now, to conclude the first part of writing a statement of the problem, the above-mentioned points have to appear, and they are going to be followed by other. Let's take an illustration. This is the title of the study: Factors of Middle School Pupils Dropout in Algeria. The text reads: in the Algerian context, school dropout represents a persistent educational challenge, particularly among middle school pupils. According to Ben Moussa and Talbi, 2019, the number of pupils who abandoned their studies before completing middle school has remained worryingly high over the past decade. This phenomenon not only undermines individual academic and professional prospects, but also has broader implications for national development and social cohesion. This can be considered as the first part, the issue. Then, although several studies have examined the causes of school dropout in Algeria, the majority have concentrated on external factors such as socio-economic status, family instability, psychological health, and cultural influences. Khalifa, 2021, Amrani and Yassin, 2020. These investigations have been valuable in identifying vulnerable populations and contextual risks. However, there remains a noticeable gap in the literature concerning the internal school environment, particularly the roles that peer relationships, teacher-student interactions, and institutional practices play in influencing students' decisions to leave school prematurely. As Masri and Boutaleb, 2022, observe, despite the presence of school-related stressors, these are often under-researched or treated as secondary concerns. This can be considered a rationale with a gap. And then, this research project seeks to address this gap by focusing specifically on school-based factors that contribute to dropout rates in Algerian middle schools. This is the aim of the study. In doing so, it aims to build upon existing knowledge while offering a more holistic understanding of the issue. By integrating school-level dynamics into the broader discussion, the study hopes to offer practical recommendations for policy reform and institutional improvement. As Zarhoni 2023 argues, school retention cannot be significantly improved without first addressing the structural and relational issues within the school environment itself. School administrators would be assisted in delineating the institutional features that contribute to this problem and taking measures to improve them. This is the significance of the study. So let's try to relate the content of this text to what we have said earlier. If you look at the first section of the text, which means the research issue, you notice clearly that the writer has mentioned the when of the study, the where, and the who. That is to say, the context is the Algerian context. This is said very clearly at the beginning in the Algerian context. Then the when in the third line, we have over the past decade, and the who, here we have middle school pupils. So they are very clear and very precise. Well, now let's try to see how the issue shows divergence from an ideal situation. If you still remember the previous video when we talked about the rationale or the background section, the text included something on education and the importance of basic education for individuals, for their well-being and for their development, their personal development. Now, if we contrast this, the first section of our text today with the first section in the previous text, we see that there is a clear contrast between the ideal situation described earlier in the background section and the real situation described here. The contrast itself is clearly articulated by the writer of this text in the last sentence of the first part, saying that this phenomenon not only undermines individual academic and professional prospects, but also has broader implications for national development and social cohesion. So the situation is presented as a problem or an issue. Although this section of the statement of the problem is very brief, but it clearly shows a real issue. Next, the writer moves to talk about the rationale to justify conducting his research, and also hinting or clearly talking about the research gap. Here, although several studies have examined, so the word although is important. Now, from the point of view of writing, it is important to use words that show concession, like although, in spite of, however, to show the concession between existing research and later what is missing. So technically, as a writer, you should know how to use these words, these connectors or connecting words expressing the relationship of concession. They help you show your gap. Now we continue reading. Although several studies have examined the causes of school dropout in Algeria, the majority have concentrated on external factors such as socio-economic status, family instability, psychological health, and cultural influences. This is the previous literature. And the emphasis in the previous literature, previous studies. Notice that between parentheses we have the sources. It is cardinal that you include the sources here when you talk about previous research. And this strengthens your position. These investigations have been valuable in identifying vulnerable populations and contextual risks. At this point, the researcher can go further if needed, and this depends on the level of research, whether it is an advanced level, doctoral level, or just a master's level. You can go deeply into the studies and focus on each separate study, telling about what's important, what's the focusing on the methodology if you want to, or focusing on the findings if you want to. But here it is just mentioned briefly, it is summarized. Then, however, there remains a noticeable gap. Here the word gap appears very clearly, but you're not obliged to use the word gap. This can be implied. Just for the sake of explanation, here we are using the word gap. However, there remains a noticeable gap in the literature concerning the internal school environment. So this is new. This was not covered by previous studies, according to the writer, particularly the roles that peer relationships, teacher-student interactions, and institutional practices play in influencing students' decisions to leave school prematurely. Here the writer is saying that these three aspects, were not covered by previous research. And in a way, the writer is saying that we need to research these. We have to focus on them. And this justifies, this is a rationale, this is why the study is needed. Then, as Nasri and Botaleb 2022 observe, here kind of evidence to back up, to strengthen your position, despite the presence of school-related stressors, these are often under-researched or treated as secondary concerns. Look at the word under-researched. Sometimes we need some specific words like under-researched, under-studied, were not given attention. So there are specific expressions that show to the reader that research on a particular aspect is missing. A reader of your text, when arriving at this point, will be convinced that research is really needed. And this is, you have managed, in fact, to convince the reader just by showing what was not covered in earlier works. Then, this will facilitate for you to state your objective. Therefore, the expression of the objective should be explicit. It's not enough to say that research is missing or that an area is under-researched. You have to formulate, to articulate in clear words, in a statement, what you want to do or what you intend to investigate. Here comes the articulation of the objective. This research project seeks to address this gap by focusing specifically on school-based factors that contribute to dropout rates in Algerian middle schools. This is the general objective. Later, this will be developed into specific objectives. Then, the writer comes to the point where he highlights the significance of this kind of research. And this is said in the last section. In doing so, it aims to build upon existing knowledge while offering a more holistic understanding of the issue. So he's stressing that this will provide a better understanding of the issue. And then he moves to talk about the practical benefits of the study. By integrating school-level dynamics into the broader discussion, the study hopes to offer practical recommendations for policy reform and institutional improvement. So, the study offers the selection of the words here is important. It offers, it would benefit, especially the expression would plus verb. Well, as Zarhoni 2023 argues. Here you can work without referring to previous references, but if any, you can make use of them to strengthen your position. School retention cannot be significantly improved without first addressing the structural and relational issues within the school environment itself. So the writer is saying that dealing with such structural issues would help us improve the school retention, which is the opposite of school dropout. That is to say, going or approaching the ideal situation. Well, school administrators, another stakeholder here, another community who will benefit from the study, would be assisted. Look at the structure. Would be assisted in delineating the institutional features that contribute to this problem, and so understanding the problem itself, and then taking measures to improve them. Here you see that this discussion shows a problem, then shows the gap, shows the goals, the objectives, and then highlighting the significance so that the ideal situation is achieved again. Once you complete that, you have in fact written the first part of your statement of the problem. In the statement of the problem section, the objectives should be detailed. The objectives should reflect the research type. When we read them, we should learn something about the research type. If we take the previous example on school-based factors that contribute to dropout rates in Algerian middle schools, the following objectives can be formulated. So the researcher can write, the primary goals of this study are outlined in the following research objectives. This is a statement to introduce the objectives. We should have statements, and we have ready-made phrases that show that come before the objectives. Here we can see 3 objectives. The first one is to investigate how peer relationships affect dropout decisions among Algerian middle school pupils. The second one, to assess the role of teacher attitudes and practices in school dropout among Algerian middle school pupils. And finally, to examine how school policies influence school dropout among Algerian middle school pupils. Notice that the 3 sub-objectives are only derived from the main goal, and they do not fall beyond the scope of this general goal. Taken together, they contribute to the general goal. Also, notice the use of action verbs to investigate, to assess, to examine. These should be selected carefully. Finally, notice that the main constructs or variables of the study exist in the formulation of the objectives. We see the term school dropout, middle school dropout. Also the population is there, and also the other factors, the factors themselves like peer relationships, teacher attitudes, and school policies appear clearly in the objectives. These objectives taken together work or function as a skeleton for the whole work. They constitute the core of the study. The researcher may write other secondary objectives which are a byproduct of these main objectives. Those concern the recommendations, but the core is these 3 elements. Next, the statement of the problem section must conclude by writing research questions. They tell explicitly what the study will investigate, and these are the central questions to be answered. And also, where applicable, any hypothesis that the researcher intends to verify should be stated as well in the research proposal. And this can have a separate subtitle. We take an illustration. In relation to the previously stated objectives, we can have the following research questions. So the writer or the researcher can write, Based on the research objectives, the following questions have been formulated to guide the investigation. They can also write another statement. The first question is, to what extent do peer relationships affect dropout decisions among Algerian middle school pupils? See or notice that question 1 is connected to objective 1. The second question, to what extent do teacher attitudes and instructional practices influence school dropout among Algerian middle school pupils? And the last one is, to what extent do school policies and administrative procedures contribute to school dropout among Algerian middle school pupils? The first remark is that the number of questions corresponds to the number of objectives. Questions make our research more operational. In other words, by the end of the study, or after gathering data and analyzing the data, you will answer each of these questions and only these questions. You may formulate hypotheses in relation to these questions, the same questions. So the hypotheses are statements derived from the questions themselves, but we should say that it's not an obligation to have a hypothesis for each question, because there are some types of questions and types of research that do not necessitate hypotheses altogether, because sometimes hypotheses restrict research. In exploratory studies, for example, formulating hypotheses will reduce the richness of the data that are gathered. One final thing can be added to the explanation of writing a statement of the problem. This is about the definition of key terms. One way to avoid any potential confusion regarding the constructs themselves or the variables that appear in the questions and in the objectives. After writing the objectives and the questions, you may devote a whole subsection which is termed definition of key terms. You will write definitions, operational definitions to all the terms that you have used, and then you are going to act based on these definitions in your study. And sometimes the definitions provided by the researcher make the difference between one study and another. So, for example, if peer relationship in one study is defined according to one specialist in the field, another specialist may give a different definition, and on the basis of these differences, the directions of research may also diverge. Now let's conclude our discussion about how to write a statement of the problem. A statement of the problem will show an issue and will provide a rationale based on a gap. It shows also it articulates the goals of the study and the precise objectives. It highlights the significance of the study. Why is the study a useful one? And should include the research questions and the hypothesis if applicable. Also, if applicable, and in order to avoid confusion, you can provide a definition of key terms. Now, if we take all this together as a statement of the problem section plus the background section, sometimes these two components are called the statement of purpose.